Please note that this meeting will be recorded. As you all are coming in, we would like to know where you guys are joining us from, whether it's a state or a different country. We would love to hear from you or put it in the chat. We currently have approximately 9 participants, so we're just going to give it maybe 2 more minutes for others to join, to give that opportunity for others to join.
How many members do you have in this group?
In this group per se?
No, in the whole network, the Latino network.
Natalie, I think at one point we said we were around 4,000.
4,000.
That's an incredibly large group.
Yeah. And then as an alumni association, I think I saw the latest numbers were about 400,000.
Welcome, Maritza from Beltsville and Joseph from Houston.
Go Houston. Go Astros.
All right, Natalie, what do you think? Should we go ahead and get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
Perfect. Welcome everyone to our second annual Dia de los Muertos event. Today joining us, we have Cynthia Vidaurri again joining us. She is a folklorist in the research department of the National Museum of the American Indian and has worked in cultural representation for almost 30 years. She has published book chapters and articles on a variety of cultural expressions, and she has curated several museum and virtual exhibitions and the Smithsonian Folk Life Festival programs. For today, she's going to be giving us a presentation on Dia de los Muertos, in more specifically on deconstructing the altar and ofrendas. So Cynthia, turning it over to you. Welcome, welcome. We are very happy to have you here.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you and Natalie for inviting me to do this. I think I should get you all on my schedule for yearly from now on, just to make sure that I'm available for that, because you guys are so enthusiastic about this project or this work. And I'm glad to talk about it, because it's really one of those things that everybody knows something about, but everybody probably knows a lot of incorrect stuff about. So it's very easy to get confused and kind of all of the clutter and all the noise that's out there. And there's certainly lots of information on an internet. So what I'm going to do is bring up, okay, can you re-enable my screen sharing, please?
Oh, sure. You should have that.
So I'm going to bring up I like talking behind with images, because it helps highlight the types of things I'm trying to say. And
here we go. I think you can now start sharing.
Okay, let me try again, because it keeps on telling me that I'm still disabled.
Oh, give me 1 moment. I do apologize. There we go.
Okay, let's see. Okay. All right, so I'm not quite sure what you're saying, but you should have a title page up.
Correct.
That's what you got.
Okay. Constructing the
All right. So what I want to do is just give you a little bit of brief intro, because it's a very long, complicated topic that literally goes back thousands of years, and want to get you up to speed at trying to deconstruct an altar. What do these things mean? What goes on the altar? And one of the things that I'm always amazed about is that everybody's an expert. And I was thinking, it's how are you becoming an expert about a topic that is so massive? And people will argue to the nth degree, like, no, this is what makes it real. No, this is what makes it real. So we'll talk a little bit about that, in a second. So let me see if I can get. Okay, so I want you to think about. Sorry, there you go. What is Day of the Dead? Well, Day of the Dead is celebrated on November 1st and 2nd, not because that was the way it's always been done. In actuality, what we know about Day of the Dead historically comes from what happened in the Aztec Empire. because that was the last group that moved into the Central Valley of Mexico. And that is a primary group with whom the Catholic and European, Spanish conquerors came into contact with. Those were the stories that were documented. But in reality, throughout Mexico, you see, this tradition in many, many, many different ways. Also, all cultures have ways of dealing with death. This is just one community or one region that deals with it in this particular way. And it is, we can't say that Mexico is the only one. The tradition that we know in the United States primarily is based on what happens in Mexico, but lots of indigenous communities, throughout the Americas have a Day of the Dead variety of some sort. So when the Catholics came, they had All Saints and All Souls Day, and like good converters, they tried to use what was in the local community and the local culture to try to convert people over. So because November 1st and 2nd were All Saints and All Souls Day, they figured, that works close enough, and we're going to merge this whole Aztec thing together with this, and that's how it came to be celebrated on November 1st and 2nd. In the old days and in some communities, there was special days for the dead throughout the year, and there were several different celebrations, but it's come down to be focused on the 1st and 2nd in contemporary times. It's a time to remember. In some communities, they actually believe that their loved ones come across from the afterlife to the earthly plane. Whether you go to that far to believe, it doesn't necessarily have to be that extreme, but it can also be somebody who just wants to take time to remember their loved ones. And this is where you can come together. A lot of times families will go through this kind of time together, and they will construct their ofrenda together. But it's a time to celebrate lives, and you can see a little bit of that when we start looking at the ofrendas. And these ofrendas are these spaces where you receive your loved ones. A lot of people of late, you'll see people using the term altar or altar. I personally don't care for it, because in my interviews with people in communities, when they're speaking to me in Spanish, they use the term ofrenda. But because people see this kind of this thing that looks like an altar that you would see in church, sometimes the terms get used interchangeably, but it's not a place where you come and provide a sacrifice, to that. It's not a place where you come to engage with a God. This is a place where you receive your family members or your loved ones. So this does come from pre-Columbian roots. Like I said, in the Aztec period, they had the Little Feast of the Dead, which was a Micalhuitl, and the Micalhuitl, which is the Great Feast of the Dead. And over both of these feasts are presided by Mictecacihuatl, who was the Lady of the Dead. And I mentioned to some of you earlier that, and I'll show you a little picture further down the line, I recently acquired a Cholo Ixcuintli. For those of you who saw the movie Coco, Cholos are believed in the pre-Columbian mythology to be your guide to the afterlife. So there's a long-term relationship with animals that are associated with this, and the Lady of the Dead is involved in it. There is also a Lord of the Dead that can be looked at. That's another little detail. When outsiders started trying to understand the religious systems in Latin America, they didn't understand kind of what the subtleties were, so they started referring to these things as all gods. I've had colleagues in Mexico say, well, they're not really gods. We use the term gods, but they're really kind of Lord and Lady. If you almost thought of like in the Catholic tradition that you have God, you have the Son of God, but then you have all of these saints that have domains that they're good for certain types of things. So all of these lords and ladies in Aztec mythology had territorial domains. Some were good for rain. You had, people that oversaw women during childbirth. You had, people related to the, wealth and well-being of corn. So, just as you're doing any of your own work and thinking about these things, don't think about them as gods in the conventional sense that we have in 21st century knowledge or experience or interpretation, but think of them as kind of specialty people that had different domains. So in Mexico, it's found throughout the entire country right now. Historically, in this part of, you can see my highlighter where it's got this part of the US-Mexico borderlands, you did not have any of this. And I'm from South Texas, and I wrote in my thesis, how this was not an expression on there. But now, because of tourism, because of popular culture, all of the stuff that's being sold, you find this being practiced all over the US-Mexico border. And before, you could only find, all of the stuff that goes on our ofrenda during the fall season. Now you can find it year round because people are buying it year round on there. But historically, it's been here in the central valley of Mexico, which is right here around Mexico City and stuff. Oaxaca, which is this area right here in the south. Oaxaca is the most indigenous populated state of Mexico. And then you also have it in Michoacan, where you have lots of Purépecha people, and you have a lot of communities that have very, very strong traditions there. That's also, those are the three sites where a lot of the tourism has been kind of overtaken by outsiders. This holiday or this event is loaded with all sorts of stereotypes and misconceptions. And I don't know, I've read so many things that people say, oh, Mexicans are laughing at death. They're not afraid of it. Well, Mexicans are afraid of death just like anybody else. Is it just the way they process it may be differently. Some say, oh, it's associated with human sacrifice. It's all that Aztec bloodlust, and going back to an archaeological find that saw this kind of wall of skulls that was at a temple. And you said, like, they're all into sacrificing stuff. So they're all about dead stuff. And that's why they put the skulls on the ofrendas, which again is a relatively new addition there. People think that all Mexicans or Mexican Americans celebrate this holiday, or even all Latinos on there, but don't realize the distinction within different national communities on there. That's not the case. This is a relatively new phenomenon in the United States. It doesn't come about until the 1960s and more in the 1970s with the Chicano movement. People also tend to make this a highly romanticized interpretation of Mexican culture. If you actually go into a home experience on there, you're going to find it to be very different than what you see on the streets and in public spaces. The primary activities are the home ofrendas and the cleaning of cemeteries. This is in Lake Janitzio in the state of Michoacan. That's had one of the strongest traditions. And one of the things that they routinely do is to go to the cemetery. And that's a time when you go and clean. You put new flowers down, but you can also decorate them. And this is a time where you can convene with your loved ones there at the cemetery itself. You may have an ofrenda at home, but you may go out on one of the 2 days to the cemetery itself. There's people holding vigils. Depending on the community, you might have a priest doing mass at the cemetery or a special mass in the churches on there. But again, it depends on how far the spectrum are that you follow your Roman Catholicism or not. This is a time where a lot of economic activity also happens. And historically, it was where people produce things for local consumption, not for tourism consumption. Bakers making breads, the flour vendors, it's wonderful to be in the flower markets in Mexico during this time because there's just oceans and oceans of this marigold, the zempasuchil, in the stockpiles there. And for craftspeople who would do the papel picado, the state of Puebla is predominantly known for the papel picado, although it's now made in all sorts of places. That's really one of the bedrock communities of it. And the sugar skull makers were certainly that. Again, sugar skulls are not universal, but they become universal because of popular culture. So if you look at, like, this is the type of thing that you might see at a cemetery. Like, this is the cempasúchil, the marigold that grows in Mexico. And this is the flower that is most associated. If there's any one thing that I would say is universal, is a cempasúchil. This is the part that's really critical. And, here's an example of somebody. You can see how they have these wonderful bags that they make in Mexico where they brought out stuff and they decorated with flowers and such. And it's not uncommon to see people go out and do that. In fact, my sister and I were talking about going out and doing that where my father is buried, which is at a military cemetery. And we thought that might raise all sorts of eyebrows. So we're not quite sure if we would venture to do that. We might have the police called out on us for like spreading out some food and hanging out with my dad there. And ofrendas are the core of the celebration. This is the deepest, most personal, most profound interpretation of this event. That's where, people are literally coming home to be with their family. And you can see the difference. And as we go on, there's going to be a test at the end to see how much you understood about this. But you can see the aesthetic is going to be greatly different in the home ofrendas compared to what you see in the public spaces on there. I love this image because, this is somebody's, living space, and you can see their wardrobe is back here, and, all of their usual stuff is on the wall, and now they've just added the space for their ofrenda. And I love the fact that they've taken these containers, they're probably tin cans, and have painted them to match up their house on there. This is in the state of Michoacan, where you see the same type of things, and they're using fruit crates that are used for this. And you see people actually just spending time, with plates. After the food, people always ask me, what happens to the food? Well, people consume it, after the spirits have been here and they've had their food, you get to eat it as well on there. But this is where you literally receive your loved ones, coming back home on there. So where can you find these things? They're all over the place in the United States and throughout in Mexico. They're obviously in museums. The National Museum of the American Indian has a long history of having ofrendas. And when times were normal, we had actually public programming around Day of the Dead, where we had dancers and musicians and craftspeople coming through. You see them at cultural centers in the United States, the cultural centers predominantly in California, that has the longest history with ofrendas, is involved with them, but certainly, throughout DC right now, there's a lot of virtual programming. Banks in Mexico will have ofrendas, hotel lobbies, government buildings, plazas, all sorts of public spaces. Major avenues will have Day of the Dead art installations of some variety. Universities have started taking it on. Stores, all sorts of stores, whether they're a large chain store or they could be kind of a community little neighborhood store, or your little taco stand, in the midst of a big city can have a small scale ofrenda. Certainly homes. And now there's competitions where people are actually going into contests to figure out who puts together the most, whatever the criteria is, the most elaborate ofrenda. Well, who makes them? It seems like everybody makes them this year. I love searching the internet to see what's happening with the phenomenon. And you can literally buy ofrenda kits. If you don't have any experience with this, if you don't come from the tradition, don't worry. You can go and put together your entire ofrenda off of a kit that you can get online. You can go into Target, has really glommed onto this as they're kind of hosted some sort of cultural how should I say this? They're looking for cultural products to sell to a larger audience, and they usually have 2 or 3 rows of Day of the Dead products in their stores, which it's kind of really interesting, to see that mass produced items that are usually coming from China that are now being put on ofrendas by non-Mexicans, by non-Chicanos to celebrate Day of the Dead. Community members can be involved and do this. University students, usually a lot of university students from the art department are involved in this. You also have just individual artists or collective of artists. In Mexico City, they're putting together these incredible installations of giant skulls. They're called, cráneos, that they have on there, and they're all painted in different ways, and they all have their storyline according to the artist. And they also have a QR code that you can go up there and take your phone and take, it'll tell you all about it. And they have a map online that can tell you where the next one is. And it's certainly, an Instagram shot moment for you to be in these cráneos. But it's being funded, patronized by a funeral home chain in Mexico City. But it goes down the major Reform Avenue, and they're like, what we had pandas here for the longest time in DC because of the pandas that we had at the Smithsonian Zoo. So it just become an icon of Mexico City. They always featured different artists, over the course of the different years. Employees at different units and different entities can be involved in putting it together. And we're certainly seeing it in schools and with students, and especially in the United States. That's kind of one of the biggest places that people are learning about that. If you go online, you will find all sorts of products online for teachers and education materials. Half of them want to make me very, very upset. And, it's very difficult to find things that are appropriate and respectful, and that also kind of give you a kind of a deeper lesson about what this is. But as teachers always have to do, make do with whatever is available to them. You see a whole barrage of stuff that's usually really bad, and information that's really bad. But you can find word searches, you can find maps, you can find coloring sheets for Day of the Dead. Like every variety of Day of the Dead stuff can be found for educators. So this is where we get into the real rub here. Is it the real thing? You know, people always wanted to participate in the real thing. They want it to be authentic. You know, is it original? You know, is it like really what happens with real practitioners doing it? So this becomes, you know, as a folklorist, I have a very difficult time kind of grappling with this, because you have to kind of get a sense over the course of time of, you know, the aesthetics on the ofrendas, and you can tell about, you know, what things are. The previous ofrenda that I showed you in Michoacan at the home, the reason I can tell it's from Michoacan is because of the style rebozo that the women are doing. Michoacan has a specific design on the rebozo, on the wrap, you know, that women wear, and it's you know, how people dress. So I can, you know, over 30 years now, get to the point where I can somewhat figure out where these ofrendas are made, just because of the aesthetics on there, because, you know, each community is going to have a different aesthetic. You can have something that is authentic to that family, authentic to that community, that may not be what's done in another community. And you can have people start to argue, saying like, no, we have the real expression and you don't. What's definitely not, I almost think that authentic should be like in various degrees of authenticity, but because you have a lot of things that the governments are putting on there, a lot of tourism stuff that's going on that has a lot of authentic elements. And what I judge is what you see on the right hand side is like, who's the producer and who's the consumer of the ofrenda? Like, is it real for the person that's putting it together? Even the person that's putting on this massive installation someplace, are they thinking of their family and loved ones in mind? Are they thinking of a special teacher or mentor in mind where they're doing it? Like, who is being honored from here? I don't think I have it in this slideshow, but I have a picture of an ofrenda honoring with the Colonel from Kentucky Fried Chicken. And you're going, well, you know, while he's an icon of American pop culture, I don't know that anybody who's actually putting up an ofrenda to the Colonel actually has real emotional connections to him, unless you're a real like fanatical lover of KFC. But, you know, think about who is being honored. And right now we're seeing a lot of things for COVID and first responders that are being honored, that while they're not in community and they're being oftentimes constructed by people who are not historically connected to these communities, it's a real authentic expression of what this is. And it's used a lot of times using elements that are quite original to it. And the other big question is, does it reflect the community norm? If you saw the movie, James Bond, I think it's Spectre, that one that starts off being filmed in Mexico City, right smack in the middle of Day of the Dead, you know, and James Bond has got his James Bond music, and he's kind of walking down this street off of the main square in Mexico. And all of these people are like dressed with skulls and, you know, in costume and everything else. That thing doesn't exist. Like, it had never existed in Mexico City. Such a thing, you know, was not, you know, part of it. However, after the movie came out and it had all of this success, particularly young people in Mexico City saying, we want this big giant parade. So since then, they've actually had a Day of the Dead parade that starts in the Zocalo and the town square and proceeds down Avenida Reforma, which is a major like 6 and 8 lane avenue on there. So the thing is it real? Well, now it's real. Is it original? Well, it's original to 2018, 2019 when the movie came out, but it's these terms are very difficult to pin down an absolute yes or no. And the other thing is that I would want to say, is it traditional to that family and or community? You know, would you put varieties of that stuff in that family? And people change, you know, people, you know, want to have a bit of what they've always had on, but people will make reflections. Think about in your own experiences with holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas, and what is the norm in your family? I'm not a cook, but I felt like I needed to contribute to, you know, to our Christmas meal that my sister was putting on. And I got real fancy and I went out and bought these special gourmet potatoes to make our mashed potatoes. I proudly presented them on the table, and my sister was so upset with me because I didn't make the right mashed potatoes. And you stop and think about how silly that is, but it is important to people. Like, that's part of the tradition. That's part of what you expect. So even though people will be adding to it, is it part of what that family sees as traditional? Is it part of what they see is in their community? And is it part of what they're willing to accept to expand beyond what's traditional in their community? So like I said, marigolds are kind of at the core of all of this. You saw earlier a picture of this gateway, but you can also use marigold petals. You can see that marigolds have different varieties of colors in them. Anything from the yellow to the variegated colors to the really deep orange. Then this is, the petals are taken apart and placed on the ground to make a carpet as part of the entrance. And the carpets are pathways to the ofrenda on there. So you'll see all sorts of varieties on there. And this is like an example of a traditional market. In addition to the marigolds, you also have this right here. It's called a cockspur. And they're like these red cones that are velvety on there. They're also a very common flower to see in ofrendas. And here you see the petals that are scattered throughout on there. And you can see, like in this picture where I had, what is Day of the Dead, the guy carrying this big giant bundle. I also like how the flowers are expanded beyond just the offerings themselves, the ofrendas and cemeteries. This is in the state of Michoacan, and look how they've used the petals, the flower blooms to decorate the wrought iron on these windows. But they also take these kind of parking cones. This is where you block off parking for your clients, and they've decorated those cones as well. Here you can see some of the risks of putting your petals out, because this cross is lost to the left-hand side of it, but you can make crosses out of the marigolds as well. Copal is also very influential. I like to categorize these things in elements that are made to provide delight for the person who's being honored, elements that help guide, and then you have elements that are just intrinsically aesthetic, just to make it beautiful. So copal is one of those elements where you want to use it because it transmits prayers, it purifies the air, but also the scent guides the dead to the land of the living there. And there's these wonderful little urns that you can buy throughout Mexico. There are various degrees of elaborateness that you can use to do that. Copal is a specific tree resin that has little things that look like amber nuggets, and it has the most unique scent to it. Papel picado, which has become synonymous with Day of the Dead. Again, it was not typical in all places growing out of the state of Puebla, but now you see it everywhere. Just because I'm not very good at keeping track of things in my house and stuff, I've ordered the plastic papel picado, but the symbolism of this paper, and it's literally chiseled paper. It's, part of it is for joy of the season, of the time. It also represents the wind, but also represents the fragility of life. And this tissue paper is quite fragile, but it's not quite practical, particularly if you're putting an ofrenda outdoors. So a lot of times people will opt to go for the plastic papel picado. Archways you can see all over the place.
Question, sorry to interrupt.
Sure,
you.
sure.
Papel picado, is that also used in different seasons of Mexico as well, in different events?
Absolutely. If you ever have a chance to go to Puebla, in the capital city of Puebla, there's places where you can find that they have all of these varieties. They're used for weddings, they're used for Christmas events. The design will be different according to what it is. Like for weddings, you can get the bride and groom's name chiseled into the paper on there. So it can be quite particularized to that wedding. But it's kind of a thing that's become popular everywhere. Christmas is wonderful in Mexico. And people will have red and green banners, everywhere in Mexico. It's really spectacular to see. And it's much more inexpensive to obtain in Mexico. And the variety of it is just so immense. But yes, you're absolutely right. It's used on a lot of different things. You notice that these two ofrendas don't have papel picado.
Right.
Again, it doesn't necessarily have to go on everything. So you see these archways, and this is, in some communities, they say this is the doorway between the afterlife and the human life. So our loved ones need a door to go through. So you put an arch through them. Some people just put it up as a decorative figure. Some people, like put one up and have no earthly idea what they put it up. What's important is when you start looking at this closely, visit with folks and ask them, what does this mean to you? Why do you have it here? And in some communities, you absolutely have to have the archway. In other communities, you can't. And some people don't have the means by which you can construct one, so they may not have it, even though it's appropriate in their community. Salt is also something that's commonly seen. For some, it represents the continuance of life. I just read something yesterday where it's used as a benediction for children, but not for adults. And for some adults, it's used to help deal with sins that were not atoned for, so that you're not impacted by sins that you still have hanging on your list that you've not asked for what is it? I'm sorry, I'm thinking in two language, perdón, forgiveness. Sorry, I'm going to throw various language at you before this thing is over. So a lot of times it can be just in a cup, just a little serving, or it can be in the shape of a cross. Crosses also become very, very problematic to understand. If this is a strongly indigenous person that's putting this on there or has an indigenous interpretation, the cross is not a cross in Christianity's cross. The cross is the four directions, the four cardinal directions that are always honored in tradition and ceremony in pre-Hispanic cultures on there. So it's difficult. You see how this particular cross is not elongated like this one is? This may very well, again, I don't know this until I talk to the folks. This may very well have been something that was done with somebody with more of a pre-Hispanic interpretation for Day of the Dead. Water. Again, water can be, something to quench the thirst after their long journey, or it can be, this was something new that I just learned about water in a basin with soap and towel for people to bathe. And I was just sharing with a friend of mine. She goes, are they dirty in afterlife? I only have a limited amount of hours to spend with my loved ones. Why would I want them to take time out to go take a bath? And I just go well, maybe they died like in the middle of doing a job, and they died in like a dirty job in construction or in the field, and they would enjoy actually having a bath when they come back to the living. It's also individual and also particularized, and these are regional meanings. This, thank you, Lan, for getting me started on this, because I've just been doing so much work of late and for research for this, that I've now actually started a database of all of these different interpretations, because there's so much out there. Some of it is unattributed. I don't know to which communities, but it helps me go and pinpoint my research when I'm working in a specific community to figure out what they're telling me these things mean. But it's just absolutely amazing. If you can just Google, what does water on an ofrenda mean? And there's like just countless of things that come down that would tell you like all of these different meanings on there. And it can be served in glasses. Like these folks have a pitcher, and they have a lime on the side of it. So if you want a piece of lime in your water, which is quite common in Mexico. Candles are also a light source, is also very important. In a lot of places, particularly in the United States, that we have all of these rules about fire in buildings, you see a lot of the battery candles are now becoming popular on there. And you can leave your ofrenda lit the entire time when you're away from your office or your business without fear of that. But in Mexico, you find a lot of the wax candles still. So they're also light to illuminate the way. They guide you to the ofrenda. If they're unadorned, it usually means the soul is alone, and in the afterlife, maybe there's nobody for that person that remembers them. And also, you have these very elaborate ones. The state of Oaxaca has this phenomenal tradition for candles. They're just beautifully elaborated. Some of these, this is a combination of paper and wax on there, and those have different meanings. There's also a variety of candle that's perhaps about this big around, that's kind of a long pillar candle, and those have yet a different meaning. And of course, the religious candles that might have images of saints on there are also particular to the family and who they're devoted to in their religious life. So you can see an example here. We have a cross, we have some saints, and we have the individual pictures here. You see how this is a pretty simple ofrenda. It's not elaborate but we'll see some really elaborate ones. And the Virgin of Guadalupe is almost necessary everywhere in Mexico, not just for the Day of the Dead. She is the patroness of Mexico. She appeared to an indigenous person shortly after the conquest of Mexico. And she is, this could be another topic we could talk about. There's a lot of Indian symbolism in this image on there, and Native people in Mexico And Mestizo people in Mexico really see her as this mother goddess called Tonantzin, and say she's just kind of been refurbished for the Catholics. But this is really Tonantzin, and Tonantzin was venerated on the hill where the Virgin of Guadalupe appeared. So it's not difficult to make the abstraction on there. And when Mexico kind of got riled up and got going and tried to get people to embrace the idea of independence from Spain, Father Miguel Hidalgo actually takes a standard that's this kind of like you see in churches with images of different states. He gets the standard that has the Virgin of Guadalupe and starts parading down the streets and carrying her banner to help unify people to fight Spain for independence. So a lot of times you'll see the Mexican flag associated with Virgin of Guadalupe images on there. This is the absolutely most important image in Mexico. When we signed the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, Mexico came to the table of what they would be willing to negotiate. Even the state company, Pemex, the petroleum company, says we're even willing to negotiate over our oil. The only thing not in debate is the Virgin of Guadalupe. So that tells you something about how significant this image is in Mexico. And it is, again, I'm not Catholic, but I have a Virgin of Guadalupe that a friend of mine made, and she's on my ofrenda all the time, just because she is, so Mexican. The crosses can come in different forms and different materials. Cal, which is lime, they can be made out of flowers, or ceniza, ashes, or serene, which is the sawdust. There are Guatemalans in the DC Metroplex area. They make these incredible carpets out of ash, out of the serene, that are colored. They are just exquisite on there. So like in this particular friend, that they have one of lime, the marigolds, and the ash, the cenizas on there. You always have to have a photograph of who the ofrendas is intended to honor and receive. And here you see very kind of personal images, of people. So then if you get into the question, is this real? Is this authentic? Well, it's authentic after photography became common and accessible to people on there. It certainly wasn't authentic in Aztec times because there was no such thing. But is it acceptable? Absolutely, it's acceptable because it's become part of the norm of the tradition. And remember, the culture always evolves. It's not always static. Yeah. This is a really interesting part because a lot of these things were actually created after the 1930s, late 1890s into the 1910s, but in the 30s it really takes off. It starts off with this image here of La Catrina. She was kind of the disembodied head, and she's referred to as La Catrina Garboncera. Garboncera was a pejorative term to talk about Native people who did not want to be Native. Like this was a time that Mexico was looking towards France for its cultural influences. You see a lot of French architecture in Mexico City particularly. And so this was intended to make fun of Native women that were trying to come off as Europeans. And so later on, Diego Rivera ends up making this full-bodied image in one of his paintings, and from then on it just like took off, like nobody's business. So now you have people like doing all sorts of catrinas that can be done in wax and paper mache. This one is really interesting to me because this is huichol, I think, because of the beadwork, and this is a huichol symbol. So the huicholes previously had not been involved in this, but they've gotten on the tourism market as well, but yet keeping what they're known for is their beadwork, keeping it in kind of the aesthetics and values of their community. And you see like these skulls, the sugar skulls, but you see them also made with amaranth. You see them made with chocolate. You see them made with sugar. Some of them are just plain wax. These particular ones that you see are intended as gifts. This aluminum piece of paper here, this is where your name would go to, and the person that you're gifting it to, their name would go through. And it's intended to be funny, and it's not intended to, like, people say, like, are you wishing them dead? No, it's just there's something at the moment. And then a lot of paper mache full skeletons that you can find there. This is a traditional traditional craft that's seen in Mexico, but more and more they're doing all of these Day of the Dead scenes. Frida Kahlo, poor Frida, she's rolling in her grave, I'm sure, because she's been so used, and she was a communist, and she's making money for all sorts of people, and she's and her community are not reaping any of the benefit. But a lot of ofrendas to Frida Kahlo, a lot of artists in the United States, a lot of Chicanas in the United States will create an ofrenda for Frida Kahlo. She's certainly revered in Mexico, but you'll find a lot of these little boxes with those things. And again, sugar skulls, again, life is precious. Death is always close to us. And at any given moment, this can, be us. And you can get them from these little kind of, I would say they were about this big, about cookie size, to this kind of more conventional size. And these are about 4 or 5 inches. And then you get, like, some of the artists are making these things in like massive paper mache. You can have things like petates, and this is a pre-Hispanic a piece. This is a woven reed mat, and sometimes you put them in the front of the ofrenda. Some people use them to sit around the ofrenda, to be around their loved ones. Some people use it as aesthetic thing, like for this one that's a little bit more elaborate with the purple that's woven into it, as kind of a background. A lot of people like to put backgrounds on that just as a place to frame the rest of the ofrenda, but it's not necessary. Pan de Muerto, you've all went in there, and if you are needing pan de muerto, and you need to get to it soon, because my panaderia said that they would guarantee it for the first, but they wouldn't guarantee it for the second. So this is bread that has got images of bones on there. Some of them have like a round little nodule here, and that's meant to represent the skull, the cranium. But there's literally hundreds of pan de muertos. This is what we tend to see here most often. This is the most common design. But I was fortunate enough to be in Mexico City when they had an entire exhibition around the Zócalo and around the town square. And it was the most amazing thing, because every region has its own variety, its own flavors. And here you see a little bit of that. These little things right here, this is all pan de muerto, but this is designed to be more like, this is the head at the top. And then this is like where the arms would come out, where there's flowers on there. And it's a totally, totally different look at pan de muerto. On there. But if you ever have a chance to see these things, they're really amazing. The bakeries in Mexico City at this time of year are phenomenal, because all of the temporary advertising that they do with painting the windows, they themselves could be art installations. You certainly put favorite things for the person who's deceased. Here you go. You see some other examples of pan de muerto right there. But this is really loaded down with all sorts of flowers, of fruits, and vegetables. This is a really phenomenal, this I would say would be a little bit more on the traditional side. So is this one, here they have roscas rather than pan de muerto right there. You have other varieties of bread there, but you see the long column handles. So you put the things that are favorite to those people that you're honoring. Because this is, remember, this is the time, think about spending, putting a table for dinner guests. What would you put out that they would enjoy? The foods can be anything. If it was a child and you want to put a happy meal on there, that's totally valid on there, because that's what that child would have liked. In Mexico, you put some of the really common dishes like chiles en nogada, which is this plate here. You have mole verde, and you have the conventional brown mole that's here. Mole is particularly interesting, and tamales also as well, because they are very labor intensive, and you're wanting to give the best for the people that you love. You don't want to just throw a frozen meal on there, because that doesn't show that you've actually put a lot of thought and care into it, unless the frozen meal was important to that person. Lots of sweets, lots and lots of candies that are put out for Day of the Dead, but you can see flan. Alcohol. I found this really interesting, because this is an ofrenda in Mexico, but they have a Caribbean rum that's on there, but it's almost goes without saying that you have to have tequila, mezcal, or sotol on a Mexican ofrenda if they like alcohol. This to me is a really, really famous or interesting point of discussion. It's like you can get online and Google, like, how many levels of an ofrenda should you have, or what's an authentic, a real ofrenda, and you'll run into things like this. This is something that came up in Google, and it tells you like you have to have X number of levels. You have to have and it has to be laid out in a certain way. Well, that's true in some communities. See, this one says the 9 stages, because indigenous people believe that the soul had to go through these 7 stages to do that. 7 stages. historically, the Mictlan, the land of the dead, is perceived to have 9 places. So it would be 9 stages. So again, it depends on who you're talking to. It depends on what their means are. Is this an indigenous community member? Is this, rural or urban setting? Is it the artist's interpretation? Is this what a family does? Is this what the community does? Also to see, how close they are to Catholic practices. A lot of Catholics will say they have to have 3 levels. But if you're having somebody who's really 3 levels because of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, but if you're more towards the folk Catholicism end of the spectrum, then, their interpretation may be very different, blended with a lot of indigenous beliefs. And also the financial capacity to do this. You may want to do the best for your family, but you may not have the resources. So don't assume that if you see a friend and it's got these multiple levers, don't assume that's called authentic or real. And it's much more complicated than that. Okay. So now that I've led you into where you see a little bit of my world when I go and do my research, it's just, it's such a complicated issue. So now you're going to have a test, like who made it, where is it and what elements do you see? So based on the little presentation I've done I want you to start thinking about these 3 questions. Who would have made it? Would it have been somebody who's urban or rural? Would it have been somebody who was associated with an artist or an artist community? Is it in a private space? Is it in a public space? And if it's in a public space, is it like a privileged private space, like a university, like it's only university students would be interacting, or is it a big open area on that, or is it on the sidewalk, available to all sorts of consumers? And then what elements do you see in that? So what do you think about this one? And if everybody would just feel free to jump in, you can unmute and just jump in and tell me what you think. Your degree will be taken back if you don't participate.
Yes.
Ooh, those are high stakes.
Definitely in a public, like in the outdoors. Parece como una plaza. It looks like a plaza.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So it's like outdoors, but indoors at the same time.
Exactly. In Latin America, the plazas or the enclosed area, the courtyards of buildings are very important. Absolutely. Like these archways would key you into, like, this is the inside of the courtyard. And oftentimes in the courtyard, you have fountains. And I love how they've incorporated this, and they just thrown all the zempasuchil flowers, in this thing, and added food there. But you can also tell that you're in some place that is enclosed because you see this bulletin board with, postings there. So this might be a school. It might be a university building that has this on there. It also might be a work site on there. Good. All right. What about this one?
Definitely a public area, more like a festival.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm sure anybody else have any thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I would say like a government kind of feel, because you see has the around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this almost looks sponsored by La Municipalidad.
Yeah.
Walter, you get an A, you graduate cum laude. Yeah, absolutely. You can see back here where, like in this area back here, this is the presidential palace. This is in Mexico City in the plaza in the Zócalo, and you can see the scale of it by the number of people that are there. The scale of this skeleton that's here, and you can see that they're wearing a rebozo around their neck. So that's a pretty large thing. And, to be able to do this, I would be inclined to think that it's definitely kind of an artist group or somebody who comes from the arts, the theater arts, and does these major installations out there. I also think that this is really interesting that, orange is definitely a color that you associate with Day of the Dead. But because of the United States and the Halloween stuff, you're seeing people use more like black now, which has historically has not been part of the expression. But you definitely pumpkins grow in Mexico, and they're native to Mexico. So a lot of times people who see a pumpkin on ofrenda think, oh, they're blending Halloween. Well, no, it could be a pumpkin because they might want to make empanadas with pumpkin filling, and that might have been their favorite food or something. So you can't just at first glance assume things when you're looking at this. What about this one? Where would you think they are on the scale between conventional Catholicism and folk Catholicism? Where would you put them? Closer to which end? Man, a lot of you are going to have to do remedial work.
Conventional, because I see like three layers.
Mhm. Yeah, well, conventional could very well be it, but it looks, in addition to that, it looks very neat. Doesn't this look like kind of flower arrangements that you would see in the church and the church linens? Yeah, I would think this, even though if you look at this, this is under a tarp. Mexico like does all of these events where they have these fancy tents that they put up. You can see there's trash barrels laid out and there's a big background for them and there's signs here. You can tell that this definitely is an event, you know, where somebody was asked to construct it. But you could see that there might be some artistic influence there from formal art training, or this is somebody that's got like, you know, a much more, you know, here's a San Judas Tadeo, I think, much more inclined to conventional Catholicism than the folk variety of Catholicism.
Cynthia, I have a question if you can go back one. Is
Sure.
there, how do different groups interact with the altar? So say with the more conventional or non-conventional and these different settings as well, how do they interact with the
Yeah.
altar?
You know what, this is a really wonderful thing to see, because people do are respectful, you know, because at whatever level of this that you're involved in, people are respectful. Where it's not respectable or respected is where you see people that are not from the tradition, don't understand what it means, and have not taken it all. Like, I'm perfectly fine with, you know, anybody anywhere in the world taking on my culture, as long as it's part of what their life is now. You know, it's a way for them to deal with. I mean, that's all culture is. It's ways for humans to deal with life needs. So if this is something that you gravitate to and it fulfills that need, you know, that's wonderful, as long as you're respectful. Where you see it is when you have a lot of the, I don't have this, I have some slideshows. If we want to do this is an entire course, but there's some of the places that are doing are just kind of on a lark. It's a party, you know, and we're just here to party and to get drunk and wear cool makeup. And, you know, that's all we're going to do with it. So that's when you really start seeing people not being respectful. But for the most part, you could have somebody who is highly Europeanized in Mexico, doesn't come from the indigenous tradition, but understands this as a Mexican, takes this on as part of national culture, but we will always respect it. It's just, you know, outsiders that know them. I've done some work in that Janitzio Island that I showed you that's in the middle of this lake. And she tells me the cemetery is quite small. It's an island. It's a really small island. And people will tell me that the tourism has been promoted so much by the government tourism's office that they get flooded with tourists coming over during the other Muertos. They said it's so dense that we can't even get into the cemetery to be with our loved ones. And then people will come in with beer cans into the cemetery when we're there, you know, with them. So you can see how there is a conflict with people who don't understand and don't respect it on there. I mean, for these folks, it's like saying, like, nobody would want us to go into a mosque, into a church, into a Jewish temple with a beer. You know, that's not the appropriate place to do this. But for the most part, I would happily say that people are respectful, independent of what scale you're on. And it has become such an icon of national identity that it's all over the place. Before you didn't see it. When I first started looking at it, you just didn't see it. And now you can't turn a corner in any town in Mexico without seeing something like this. The other thing that's part of it, I don't think I have it in this presentation, is this has been declared intangible human patrimony by UNESCO. And it specifically identifies the indigenous tradition, not all of this other stuff that's kind of grown up over time, but the indigenous tradition is part of our national patrimony, that it is so significant that it adds to the human cultural complex that we have here. So I think having that designation is very important, because I think it will help protect it, and it makes it easier for people to use that kind of as a defense as it gets eroded in other places.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. What about this ofrenda? What elements do you see?
There's definitely an arch in here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see the arch.
It almost looks like a hallway because of the arrow right behind it, but at the same time, like indoor.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it could be like an exterior pathway, an exterior like yeah, hallway precisely with some sort of covered area and stuff. I find the aesthetics on this to be real community driven, although I think it's in a public space to some degree. I find it really, really like, you know, just all of these components, the traditional clay pottery on there. The fact that it's not kind of really froofy and highly stylized, is kind of more free form. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was
But
gonna say somebody had heart when they were doing this one.
that's a really, really good way of seeing that, you know, and you can, once you start looking and become sensitized to that, use like, you know, who is doing it, thinking of their loved ones in mind, like having heart when they're constructing it, as opposed to putting an artistic product out is a real good way of distinguishing, you know, where they are. Both are valuable, both of that, but you can kind of see the human connection in this one. How about this?
It's more like a public display.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You could see, you know, like it's at someplace in public that's, you know, got some landscaping. They've got the ferns there and they've got it installed, and they've got, it's dedicated to two scholars or academics. I can't quite tell. I have to really enlarge it. When I enlarge it, I lose focus of that. I thought it was really kind of cute because they also have right here in the middle, right under this big giant skull, Cholo Itzcuintli drawing, and he's surrounded by monarch butterflies and by zempasuchil on there. And there are some places where you can go and buy the dog in skeleton form to put on your ofrenda, you know, and referring to the zempasuchil. In Mexico City, because the Cholo Itzcuintli is kind of the national dog and the city dog of Mexico City, people are actually going out to these public events with their Cholo Itzcuintlis. It's like, this is the time of the dead. This dog was created by the Lord of the Dead, and you know, this is his time. You know, it's he's in his natural environment on there. But that led me to think that it was a little bit more kind of a not highly stylized, but pretty well stylized, and maybe in an academic setting of some sort. What about
Cynthia,
this one?
can I ask a question
Sure,
regarding about the whole community perspective part of it? How are children, you know, initially taught about altares and ofrendas, and how would it vary, like by generations or different countries? Like, do they vary?
Yeah, absolutely. They would absolutely vary on their. That's a really good generational question. I would not be surprised to see in the not too distant future, like, you know, the fairy lights are really popular now, that you can, you know, buy at any craft store or whatever, and they give just such a really soft glow, and they're not in danger of burning down your tissue paper. I would see that as a practical thing. If you've ever seen the ballet folklorico companies out of Mexico that had these elaborate costumes, and they're made with lame and all sorts of glitter stuff that you had to go to the fabric store to get, people say, well, that's not authentic. And I'm going, okay, why do you mean it's not authentic? Well, like because it's lame, they would have used natural fibers, animal hides. I said, absolutely true. But if the Aztecs had sequins, by golly, they would have put sequins on their ceremonial dress. You know, it's what you have available to you. Materials change over time. You know, certainly there's safety issues because you've got candles going on here. So as technology changes, I would imagine that subsequent generations are going to be doing that. And again, the whole, like, you know, how you introduce children to this, it's a really difficult question to ask because it depends on the individual family. There's a lot of Protestants, and there's Jewish populations and Muslim populations in Mexico. So they have their own traditions that are associated with death. And I think the real difference is urban and rural. If you grow up in a rural area where you see animals and the life of animals, you see animals being born, you see, mama calves taking care of, you know, baby calf on there. It's part of your life. It's part of the cycle, and animals die, you know, on there. How many of us have not heard stories of here in the United States, the family pet dies, and we send them off to live on the farm because they had more room on the farm. To be like, we didn't send them off to go to the farm, they died. But we don't want to tell children that they died because it's a concept that's so difficult to get to. That's one of the charming parts of the film Coco, is that it's so accessible, you know, and they're, you know, talking about people passing away and stuff, but it's so accessible And it's so beautifully done that I know of families that are using cocoa as a way to teach about death. So, I think that's really interesting that's done there, because death is one of those things, is it age appropriate? When do you teach them? When do you not teach them and stuff? And I think city folks were much more confined, not to the realities of life cycles, but, people in agricultural areas particularly certainly are. But I do think that there will be generational differences, as you see on there. Also, if people are being taught their family stories, and as these things become very commonplace, you might have a lot of families that are going back and recapturing family stories and then putting up ofrendas. More people are putting up ofrendas in Mexico than ever before. They're just, again, as part of their national identity, may not be part of their indigenous experience, but they say like, this is, and it's a good time to remember my loved ones. And, as this happens, more and more people will be adding on to your home ofrenda, because, as you get older, more people have passed on. I had a really interesting experience last year with my now wife, my nephew's wife, who is Anglo, and my niece's husband, who is Anglo, Baptist, and I think the other one is Episcopalian. I just put it out there and said, look, I'm doing this for Dad. Does anybody want to add anything to it? And Ronnie, my nephew's fiance, just sent me like 20 pictures. She goes, "Thank you so much for doing this." And she because she doesn't know about ofrendas. I would suspect in short order she will be doing this for herself, because she's gone through tremendous loss. From a young child away, like people that she's loved have gone away, and her family is shrinking. And it's a good way for her to express this. I also had a friend from Alabama who's Presbyterian, as I'm Presbyterian. And her mother just passed away. I said, you know what, I'm doing this. Would you like to put your mom? So we have a picture of this lovely Southern redheaded lady from Alabama that's on our ofrenda. And her brother, who's an attorney, was so touched by it, because they're still grappling with this loss that was so immediate on there. So I think the human level of this is so profound that I think it's okay for non-Mexicans, for non-Indigenous people to do it, but again, with respect. But I think it's also going to grow. I think this year of COVID, like I said, lots and lots of ofrendas are being put up with people that have passed away from COVID. Just kind of the numbers. If you saw the display that was put with the white flags on the National Mall for those that are lost, there was an ocean of white flags in this. And like when you start thinking of the numbers, that we were pushing close to 1 million people that have died on that, it's so overwhelming. And I really thought about it being a very open ofrenda, not very stylized by the Mexican tradition, but it is an offering. It's a remembrance, and putting it out in public, and it really kind of kicks you in the gut when you see this ocean of flags that were out there. Okay, what about this one really quickly? I don't want to take up your flower maker's time. Tell me when I need to get off, and you can pull out the hook anytime you need. Absolutely. So here you see one of those elaborate drawings.
Yeah, I would say this one is more of a privileged space. As you were saying, it takes a lot of time and effort for this one.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And they've gone through, you can see that they put decorative blocks on the end of it to keep all of this, so people won't be walking over it accidentally on it. But it's very stylized, it's very beautiful. The Catrina figures play dominant in here, absolutely. What about this one?
Some sort of events. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
What do others?
Go ahead.
Natalie, you're gonna say something, I believe.
Not in a way, it looks like kind of personal because of the dog figure there. Like maybe someone's, dog, and it was more of a personal space.
Yeah, well, actually, this is in a public space. You can see there's sound equipment back here, and there's this big poster, this big banner. It says first and second, and there's some event that's going on, and something about a record that was broken here. But actually, this is the character out. This is Dante, the Cholo Itzcuintli character out of Coco, on there. And but it could again, it doesn't mean that it's not loaded with genuine feeling and emotion. That's just the inspiration they got, for their ofrenda. But here you see the influences coming from outside that are impacting the local aesthetics on there. And I just think that that's really important to see those changes, the real changes that happen. How about this one?
Anyone? I would say this one's definitely personal, in somebody's home. But I'm not sure. The cross is just throwing me off.
So this could be a little small church in a small community. That's something, because you have the, the kind of cross that, it seems like it's been there, not that somebody wouldn't purposely put it up for the ofrenda. It could be like a community ofrenda for everybody, but it obviously seems like a really small rural community, because you wouldn't find structures like this in big cities on there. But you can see kind of the range of that. I think this, oops, I think just those two more. See, here's another one that's outside. I would be inclined to think that this might be around the area of Michoacan, because this is one of the rebosos from Michoacan that's out there. But you see here, they had the baby's breath, which is also used during this time. It seems to me like this might actually be a family or like a storefront or something in there, because it's outside. I see a television back here, a reflection of a television. But people will do that in some communities. If there was nobody left for the family, from the family of the person who had passed, somebody in the neighborhood would put up a little ofrenda, hang it off of the house wall, exterior house wall for that person that was on there. So some ofrendas are shared in public. I've seen ofrendas also constructed in carports, that are pretty massive. This one is obviously a very personalized one, devoted to the Virgin of Guadalupe. She's up front and center, just really, really loaded down with food. And this food is important to note that this is quite inexpensive to get. Unlike our fruit prices in the United States, in Mexico, you can still buy like 500 pounds of fruit for $3.75, and so this is, you can also see kind of the economic layer that somebody might have. You might put more fruit because that's more affordable to you, as opposed to putting meat, in your meals on there. But again, you never know until you talk. So here we have citations for the countless photographs that I got off of the internet. And that's all. Thank you guys for listening to rattle on. I hope this kind of inspires you to reflect about them a little bit more, and think about when you're looking at one, oh, this is what I'm seeing, or these are the questions that I would ask. And, maybe for you to think about putting your own ofrenda up as your own kind of. And I didn't think about these things as I was younger. It wasn't until my dad passed that really started having particular meaning to me. I always knew it as part of my historical cultural legacy, but not my present cultural traditions. But I did find it very, very cathartic to do that. And you can see where a lot of young people, a lot of the people in the United States that are doing this are young people bringing these traditions back. Chicanos who grew from families, that were in the Chicano movement, or young Mexican Americans that are doing that. So I think it's all good as long as it's done with respect. Thank you so much for inviting me to come back and visit with y'all. It's always fun being here with you.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Cynthia, for joining us again for a second year. I wanted to extend it out to the group. Are there any additional questions for Cynthia or comments? Now would be your chance.
No, thank you. You definitely learned something new. Definitely, I found it really intriguing with the salt and the serrín, and how you think of the cross, but the cardinal points as well. We forget of those as well. That was very interesting. That stood out to me.
Yeah, there's multiple layers and so many different layers that you can look at. So like I said, you have to take each one and kind of dissect it on its own to see what it means on there. And they all have value, they all have purpose. But it just depends on what you want to communicate. Jose, I think I told you my sister sent up a little miniature a deer statue, because my dad was a hunter and he loved deer hunting, and some of our fondest memories are when we would go out and hunt with my dad. So we now have on the ofrenda this year, I'm putting that on there. But he was also particularly fond of margaritas, so she sent me like this little miniature margarita cup to put on there. And it's going like, so you talked about the authenticity and keeping it and changing and stuff. Yeah, now we got this stuff that doesn't break. You can put it out there. You can keep it from year to year. I don't have to hull a deer part in to commemorate. And again, it's all about what was important to the people when they were alive, and what they enjoyed. Think about it. What kind of legacy would you want people to think about with you? If somebody was to construct an ofrenda for you, what would you like to have on your time on Earth?
It's very interesting. I'm thinking about all the food that I would want them to have for me. I think definitely it's something I guess in this type of group, you know, you're very much tied to your profession. So maybe something that symbolizes health and human well-being.
Yeah.
Maritza says, love the pictures and stories, so much more meaning than ever imagined. Love this. Thank you, Cynthia.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I'm happy to do it, Maritza. Maybe when we're, past COVID, we can actually, have fun in person, And do something that's
And hopefully be able to see you at the Smithsonian, and then with the beautiful Dia de los Muertos ofrenda altares that you all
Absolutely.
have.
Well, we need to think of LAN having kind of a behind the scenes trip, for the Smithsonian, and also for the ofrendas, days that we're doing that, so you can come in. We also, our colleague Hayes Labus, who does the majority of the program for Muertos, is always looking for volunteers that are bilingual and can help the person who's the traditional craft maker or whatever, help translate for the public that doesn't speak Spanish on there. So look for those volunteer opportunities, and I can put you in contact with him so he can get you put out. You actually have to fill out all these forms to be a volunteer at the Smithsonian, but he would be thrilled to have anybody coming in to do that. And it's an opportunity for you to actually learn more about the traditions and to be in contact with some of the people who produce this wonderful stuff. Because we've had papel picado makers, we've had paper mache crafters, we've had cooks, participate in it. So it's a variety of folks that are part of our programs on there.
That's wonderful to hear, Cynthia. And if you can provide us that link, we would be able to provide put it on our social media as well to open it up to the larger lawn community.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And we look so much forward to doing this again with you, and doing other events with you, for both the lawn community and, partnering with the Smithsonian.
I'll put you on my calendar for next November.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. It's always an honor to have you on board. And it's our second annual, Dia de los Muertos event that we have. And it's such an honor to have you and the Smithsonian as, our partners. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or send them off to us later, and we can go ahead and forward your questions to Cynthia.
Wonderful. And with that, we're going to move on to our second item for today, and it's making paper marigolds with Natalie. Natalie graduated from the University of Maryland in the fall of 2011, earning her BA in Spanish language, literature, and culture with a concentration in business. She currently works at, this actually has changed. Natalie can inform us on this. Natalie, where do you currently work?
I work over at the DC U.S. District Court.
Wonderful. Congratulations to you and welcome. Please take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us, and those who are still on with us, thank you so much. If you are going to be joining us in making the paper marigolds and you have your materials with you, please feel free to turn on your cameras. And if you do join us, I may do a little raffle. So hopefully that's an incentive, to have more people on camera. Wonderful. I might have to take out my background. Woo. But let me go ahead and put myself without a background so that way you all can see me doing the one-on-one with you all. All right, perfect. So hopefully you all picked up some, crepe paper. And what you want to do is you're going to open it up and you're going to fold it twice. So you're going to have one side that's shorter and one side that's longer. The longer side is where you're going to fold it in half. And what you want to do is you want to cut it right down in the middle. So grab your handy scissors and we're going to just cut right down.
And this is hot dog style, correct?
Yes, hot dog style. Good way of putting it. Thank you.
You're bringing some new terminology into the tradition.
La salchicha. All right. And feel free to use different colors. I'll be using red and I think I have some white. So if you have different colors, you know, great. So if you have finally cut your paper in half, go ahead and from that half, you can either fold it again longwise and then cut it down the middle again. So you have a long part, now just cut it down the middle. So then you're going to end up with 4 different parts. Now cut along with you all too. How's everyone going with their cutting so far? Pam, I think we both chose the same color with red.
Karen, you were saying?
I said looking good over there with your colorful paper. I love it.
Karen, what color do you have?
I'm about to use yellow. Jose, what are you using?
White.
White. Okay.
Yes.
We need to get these together.
Yes.
So Cynthia, our colors that we chose, how close is it compared to the orange that's really important with the Day of the Dead? Do they have different
Well,
meanings?
The blue might be carnation, Jose. So, it's all good while you're trying to. I have to confess to because I was telling Jose the other day that my zempasuchil didn't come up this year, so and there's not a whole lot of available at the what do you call them? At the nurseries. So I got online and went to Amazon and found like the Indians use, Hindu Indians use zempasuchil a whole lot for weddings and celebrations and stuff. So you can find them on Amazon and things that are coming from India. So I just bought like a ton of plastic Indian zempasuchil and it works, you know. So
Yes.
I mean, would I like to have, like, we usually have one plant at least that's alive that my neighbor's bringing over, but you know, in the absence of, you make do.
I found some at Trader Joe's the other day. Some zempasuchi.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
See,
My
that's
fiance brought it home and I was like,
see, to me, it's so fascinating where you see these places where you would normally not find, like, so you have all of these people that, the Trader Joe's market is a very specific kind of group of people that buy that are more exposed to it. They go to museums, they see this sort of stuff, and like, oh, we're going to bring zempasuchil for Day of the Dead, you know. Hi, baby kids. You can say hi.
All right. So now you should have 4 different sheets of paper. So I'm using white and red so you all can tell the difference. What you want to do is you want to go ahead and put your 4 sheets of paper or your prep paper together, all into one. Now the fun part begins. What you want to do is you want to do accordion style. So you want to go forward and then you want to go backwards. So if you want to use your table, feel free to do so. And all you want to do is fold it from the beginning all the way to the end. On your mark, get set, go.
Oh, it's a competition.
Competition.
I started early.
No, I'm not gonna go fast because it's gonna come out
Take your
crooked. No. Knowing myself.
Oh, babies are welcome on our Zoom meetings. Anybody else doing a zempasuchil flower? Lucia, Yvette, Joseph, Justin, Scott?
If not, don't worry. They will be recording of this. You can do it afterwards.
Yes. And feel
Okay.
free to tag us on social media with how your paper marigolds come out. That way we can go ahead and showcase you.
All right, now we have an accordion.
Wonderful.
Wait, that
So what
was
you wanna-
fast.
Yeah, she beat you.
Me too. For some
All right.
reason, mine is like sliding. I think like because it was uneven.
It's okay, because in the end, it's going to be wonderful.
Joseph said he didn't have a chance to get the stuff. It's quite all right. You'll get it next time.
Exactly. You can see the video and then you can still make it at home. All right, so now you have your accordion. What you want to do is grab one of your pipe cleaners and you're going to wrap it around in the middle of your accordion. So I found a different color, so I'll use a green one. And just go ahead, place a little bit around. You're going to wrap it around and then just twist it. That way it is in place. And so what you'll have is your stem.
Yours, it's like glittery.
Yes, it is.
Yours is,
Fancy, fancy.
All right, did everyone wrap their pipe cleaner around? Wonderful, Jose. It's going very well, I see. Okay, now, fun part, you're going to grab your scissors again. And what you want to do is on the end, you want to make it into a semicircle. And it's going to give a little bit of form to your petals. And it doesn't have to be perfect, just enough where you're cutting around. And if you cut too much, don't worry.
All of a sudden, I feel like I might have failed kindergarten somehow. Or I'm surprised that I didn't.
I feel
And
you
you
on
graduated.
that. Pam. I feel you on that.
All right, so you have something, see, mine isn't even perfect either, and it's okay. You'll find like a little oval, a long oval.
you can just
And now-
staple it and look like that.
Oh.
It's a daisy though. It's not
There
a
you go.
zempasuchil.
And now the
Halfway
fun
is a
part.
daisy.
Oh, I know, right?
Uh,
Now the
yes.
fun part begins. You can go ahead and, like Jose has his, you can go ahead and separate it where it looks like a flower again.
Mhm.
And what you want to do is individually lift each of the flaps of your flower upwards. You can either start upwards or you can start it from the bottom. Usually I like to start from the top just because it gives you more space to play around with. So my top color for me is a white one. So I'll go ahead and grab the first petal and just lightly tug it towards the top. And what you want to do is do it all around. So after you're done with your first petal, it'll look a little bit weird, but it's okay because that's still starting your petal. After you finish with the first one, you can go ahead and go to your next color. And the same process begins of taking the next petal and then pushing it up forward.
I wish I would have known this when I was teaching. I would have done so many of these things because I went to Fire and Below and I bought some large ones. I paid $5 for them when I could have just made them myself.
Hold on, Olga. Hold on. Let's see.
It's interesting because I think we did them like in elementary school, like when we used to have just like either Latinx heritage or they would like teach us about, you know, Indigenous Peoples Day. And then I ended up learning again, I believe the National Portrait Gallery had an event in DC a couple of years ago. And I saw how they made it and I was like, oh, this is very nice. All right, so how's everyone's petals? How
I
are they looking?
I only have half of it, okay?
That's good, me too.
But look, it's coming out nice.
Yes, good job. And now we're just gonna do the other half.
Mine is on a little too tight. I didn't have a pipe cleaner, so I used the tortilla twister.
Oh, hey, that's getting
Creative.
crafty.
So just a little tight, but it's all right.
And also don't worry if like when you're tugging, like mine just ripped, it's okay. Just keep on fluffing it No one will know.
No, I definitely ripped mine last year, so this time I'm going a little bit more curious. Lesson learned. Now next year is gonna be perfect.
Use the big ones.
Never mind, I spoke too soon.
Uh-oh.
Alábate pollo que mañana te guisan. There you go.
Go. You know, I was actually reflecting on, so I'm from El Salvador, and I was reflecting on if we, you know, celebrate or remember the dead. And I remember my abuelita, my grandma, we would go around this time, November, to my grandfather's, you know, to the cemetery, and would bring a lot of, you know, bread and all this type of food, and we just have a picnic around his
La bóvedas.
yeah. But I didn't appreciate it then. I think now I'm appreciating much more now that I understand, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
No, definitely. So we have like, yeah, el Día de los Difuntos y el Día de los Santos, right? So I think it's and same, and you take flowers. It's like that. And then like el zempasuchil, we call it a flor de muerto because it does, you know, I mean, I don't know. For me, I would see them a lot of around the area in the different varieties in the cemetery, like Del Pueblo Cemetery. So not many people would grow them like in the gardens. Like then it became more here. They became more like I saw it more here. So it's like pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's often, you can also find it being called as flor de muerto, but more commonly people refer to the Nahuatl word. The Nahuatl is the language that the Aztecs and Mexica people spoke, the Nahuatl people spoke. It you know, it means like 100 petals or 400 petals. I don't recall the exact number on it. And zempasuchil on there.
And also talking about pan de muerto, I know in Bolivia, I'm half Bolivian, but I have family members and they make tantawawas, where tanta meaning, you know, bread, and wawa meaning child. But they usually have an image of either a face, or they'll put their deceased person's, you know, image, like a picture, on the actual bread. How or when did that actually evolve, where they started putting, you know, images on the pan de muerto?
Oh, I can't tell you about Bolivia. You know, I know I've worked with a local Bolivia community on a project, but I don't really know what they do in Bolivia on this. But I would be inclined to think that could not really happen till after. I mean, the soonest it would happen would be like the Civil War, where they would have they had capacity to do photography, but it was extremely expensive, and most people didn't get it. Where you really don't have access to photography for working class folks throughout the United States and into Latin America, it's not going to be till the 50s. You know, if you stop and think about what that, and then when does it become common? You know, when it does that, and like if you think about it now, it's hard because we don't have photographs anymore. We're doing everything digitally. So then, like, do you have to go in that you print up stuff, and you know, how do you do that? And you stop and think that people don't have photographs in their house in the same way that they used to. There,
True.
I remember at my grandmother's house had these oval frames, and the glass was kind of, you know, it billowed out a little bit, and there was like pictures of my grandparents and my great grandparents' wedding and that sort of stuff, and it just, you know, you don't see that anymore. I have 2 family photographs in my house. You know, everything else is on my phone.
Yeah.
So, you know, how is that going to impact how people do that? I was thinking about this because I was trying to select some music to play while we had people out and around. And there's actually people who have, you know, put together playlists for canciones, you know, for muertos, and like not all of the songs actually reflect, you know, something to have to do with death, but some of it's just kind of mellow music and stuff. But I'm thinking, I was just telling my friend, I said, well, how do we get this out there? And she said, like, okay, we can wire this out. Like, she's a technology person. And I said, I wouldn't be surprised if in the not too distant future, we did not see iPads rotating through a series of photographs on ofrenda, you know, just because the technology now allows us to do that. You know, and who knows what this is going to lead to. And the technology now is changing so much faster than it had in the past that, you know, it may change, you know, by the time we get caught up with it, there's going to be something else that could be used.
It's so interesting to think about the different, how culture evolves, right, throughout the ages, and how everyone and how everything that has come about affects it. It's really interesting. I do wonder too what it's going to look like, you know, 10 years from now, or maybe even 5 years from now, as things keep evolving.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like when you made the comment about how that looked like it was made with heart, you know, you can see that when you start looking at these, you know, often enough and start thinking about them often enough, you'll get to where you understand the aesthetics and will be really intuitive to you. And you can tell if it's somebody who believes in the tradition. You can tell it's somebody who's doing so. If you go to like, there isn't anywhere that you can't get Day of the Dead stuff now. You know, it's everywhere. Like, you can go to the grocery stores and, you know, they have something for Day of the Dead. There's also this year, because I keep track of all these products that, you know, and how Day of the Dead gets taken you know, into and gets co-opted and gets used and repurposed and everything. Because there's Barbie's Day of the Dead, which they supposedly think it's good because it's done by Latino designers. Well, you know, just because you have a Spanish surname may or may not mean that you are of the culture and in the culture and respected by other culture bearers as being your voice to represent their culture. So just because you have a Spanish surname doesn't necessarily mean that you've got the, you know, the seal of approval on that. But also, what are the breakfast treats that you put in the, what are they called? Pop-Tarts. There's now a Day of the Dead Pop-Tart this year. And I'm like, if anybody finds Pop-Tarts, I will pay you a finder's fee because I'm trying to find Day of the Dead Pop-Tarts because I'm just so intrigued by the idea. I want to know what they look like. You know, I want to, and I went to get, we went to the grocery store to get some Mexican cookies for our community ofrenda on Tuesday. And we found a variety that on the back of it, they had like almost half of the surface was explaining zempasuchils, which I felt like, okay, so they're designing for this time frame, but it's a Mexican company, you know, so there's, you know, you go like, okay, so it's not the commercial side of it so much as opposed to other people getting, you know, involved. And you can see like Etsy and Amazon, and they all have it. So, and I did just, what was it, October, November, I did a conference for Latin American Studies Association on what the commercialization and globalization Day of the Dead. And I just had like example after example after example of people who are making money off of it. And a lot of these products are coming off of China. A lot of these products are being made by people who have no earthly idea what this thing is. You know, they're just cranking it out for local consumers, you know, throughout the world to buy. Do those things still have meaning? Well, at the point that they're fabricated, maybe not, but at the point that somebody actually takes them in to use them for their ofrenda or for their recognition, then it takes on meaning for them. So it's a very complicated thing to look at. You can do cocoa tours to Mexico now during Day of the Dead, and they will take you to all of these locations that were the inspiration for the film. And you're going like, well, okay, but nobody in the community is making money off of it. It's tour operators from the United States that have put these tours together on there. So you're going like, well, fine if you want. I mean, there's a whole area of tourism that has to do with films, that they influence each other. But you have to ask yourself, how does a community benefit? You know, how did the tradition bearers benefit off of that? You're taking somebody's culture and you're making money off of it. Are you doing it with their permission? Are you doing it? Is it help promoting their culture? Is it being done respectfully? Is it being done neutrally? You know, or are you making value judgments about it? So yes, please, if you can find some Pop-Tarts with Day of the Dead, you know, I would be most pleased and happy to take those.
Keep you in mind. Wonderful. All right, so how is everyone's zempasuchil looking like now? Very nice, I like it.
Man, that's impressive.
Thank you for my tortilla twister.
Came in handy.
Jose, how's yours looking? Oh, that's
Very nice. I
Very
like.
nice. Okay, so next year you guys start cranking out some paper zempasuchils for my ofrenda.
There we go. You have land to help you.
Yeah. We can come over and have dinner. We'll have some mole and, you know, we'll have some Mexican chocolate and we'll just crank out 1 billion cempasúchil flowers.
Yeah, we're just gonna
Wonderful.
show up tonight.
Well,
Like I said,
wonderful.
you're all invited if you want to come down. Like we're not expecting like 10 or 12 people, like our neighbors coming by and people just walking by, but you're invited to come over to my front yard community ofrenda if you're available on Tuesday afternoon and evening. Tuesday's the 2nd, right? I forget what day it is. Yeah, on the 2nd.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Well, lovely, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. A huge thank you, Cynthia, to the land board for making this event, happen. And I hope, you all can make more cempasúchil at home, and then that way you can have them on your altar and then, make them as your ofrendas.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank you
Cynthia.
for the lesson.
Have a wonderful night, everyone.
Mhm.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Great. Thank
Thanks,
you. Have a good
everyone.
night. Take care.